Hi everybody, Allie here at My Safe Place. I've been watching a lot of videos from the narcissistic abuse community and really learning a lot and really appreciating the really deep stuff that some of these wonderful thrivers are sharing. And this is not my forte, making videos. I've spent most of my life working with other people and helping other people. So working on myself has always been a struggle. I sort of go into an internal, I'm navel gazing, I'm wasting time. I should be working on improving myself intellectually or taking more courses. And it's become really clear watching some of these very inspirational people talking about what's happened to them in their lives and what they're doing to move forward and to heal, that I need to stop with all of this external stuff and really start exploring what happened to me. And it's about bloody time. I'm 49 years old. And some of this stuff is just too hard to look at without knowing that there was support around. And I've got a friend who's going through some really tough stuff right now, and she's doing it so bravely and looking to me for help. And that's a place of comfort for me, is me helping someone else. And forgetting that, first of all, I can't give from an empty well. And second of all, that when I do that without doing my own internal work, I'm not walking my talk. And I think it's about time that I learned how to walk my talk. So, just to sort of give a brief history, I grew up with what I believe and my psychologist believes was a cluster B mother, with a somewhat enabling and martyr-like father. And it's impossible for anyone to diagnose someone when they haven't come in, but my psychologist and I agree that in all likelihood my mother is narcissistic, borderline personality disorder, and my sister is definitely borderline personality disorder. And all of this wasn't clear until about 4 years ago. But before that, I was one of those kids who was definitely a parent pleaser, being trained to become a people pleaser. I jumped through all the hoops that my mother set for me, academically and otherwise, working on perfectionism, suffered briefly from an eating disorder, which is all about control. And in my personal opinion, a lot of it is about control. It's the one thing I could control in my life, was what I put in my body, because there was so little choice and control in other areas of my body. I didn't have a severe eating disorder. I was in the ballet world, so it's kind of par for the course there. A lot of youngsters suffer from eating disorders and perfectionism in the ballet world. But that being said, maybe that's why we're attracted to it. I don't know. I don't want to go there. So when I was getting to high school age, I wanted to go to the more popular, the bigger, closer high school, but my mother wouldn't let me because she wanted me to go to a French immersion program. And I grew up in Montreal, so speaking French properly is obviously extremely important. So I had to do that, and I wasn't allowed a lot of choice in what I was wearing or what I was doing. And by the time I graduated from high school, which in the province of Quebec you do in 11th grade, So I was 16, just about to turn 17 when I graduated from high school. I wasn't allowed to choose. Still, at that age, I wasn't allowed to choose anything about what I was going to do with my life. And I wasn't allowed to choose. Once again, in Quebec, the school system is quite different. So after you graduate from high school in 11th grade, you go on to what's called Cégep, which is Collège des études générales et professionnelles. And that is sort of like a pre-college, and it can be 2 years if you're doing more of academic work preparing for university. Or you can do professional training. Let's say you wanted to do, study to be an electrician or a nurse's aide, or some of those professional programs that take 3 years. And it's a great system. I actually really enjoyed it. So I didn't get to choose my Cégep. I didn't get to choose the courses that I took at Cégep. My mother made all those choices for me. And then when I was graduating from Cégep and getting ready for university, I wasn't allowed to choose which university I applied to. I was only allowed to apply to one, McGill, because I'm from Montreal, so it was right there, and it was the best, quote unquote. I got in. I had good grades. I was a hard worker, but I wasn't allowed to choose what I studied. I started off in looking towards archaeology because my mother thought that was interesting and it might appeal to me. It mostly appealed to her. And that was that first semester in archaeology. I physically completely collapsed and crashed. And it seemed to be the only way to get my mother to back off. And I had moments of illness before this. I was one of those people that internalized and repressed what I was feeling in favor of what my mother wanted from me, which is pretty typical, from what I understand from a narcissistic parent. And so in me, those symptoms came out very somatically in my body. But this was the biggest crash. So I took a semester off to try to heal from that, and I did sort of spontaneously get better. But at that point, I told my mother I didn't want to go to McGill. I wanted to go to Concordia, which is another big university in Montreal, and audition for and get into the acting program. It was the first time that I was ever threatened with disownment, with just being kicked out of the house. And it was all done very surreptitiously and quietly, and only when the two of us were together alone, and never in front of anybody, which I think is pretty typical. So I gave up on that. I'd always been in the performing arts. I'd been a dancer from a very young age, but it was really acting that gave me that feeling, that passion, that love. And I'd been doing drama classes and things on the side and drama club. And she absolutely refused. That was not going to be acceptable to her. So we agreed on a compromise that I could go back to McGill and change. I was allowed to change my major from archaeology to English literature. Now, I loved reading from a very young age. I loved books. And then I figured I could take some drama classes and some acting classes as well, which is what I did. McGill didn't have minors at that time. I don't know if they do now. So it was still under the umbrella of English literature. So I did as many drama courses as I possibly could. But that imposition of who she needed me to be was always there. And at the same time, I kind of had no conscious awareness of it, but my body continued to be aware of it. So I continued with that sort of people-pleasing, mother-pleasing way of being right up until 4 years ago. And when I hit the no contact button, and maybe I'll do something about what that whole deal breaker was about. After I graduated from my Bachelor of Arts in English lit and drama, I applied right away to get into the postgraduate diploma in education that McGill had, because once again, my mother insisted that I should be a teacher. And I enjoyed teaching and tutoring, and I had done that throughout high school with younger kids. But it wasn't my passion. And while I was there, I met the person who was going to be my first husband, and he really pleased my parents. So I was happy that they were happy. And so we got married very quickly and at quite a young age. I think I was 24 and he was 25, and he was in dental school. So it's, my parents were thrilled that they were going to have their eldest daughter married off to someone who made a lot of money. And there were a lot of red flags with this relationship and this person, who also ended up being a very covert narcissist. My mother was very covert and very passive aggressive and manipulative that way. And so was this guy I married, and who was also the father of my children. So I just continued very blindly and unconsciously in the pattern that I had been trained in. And I can remember when I graduated with my diploma in secondary school education, I was a high school English and drama teacher. At that time in Montreal, there were absolutely no jobs to be had, nothing. So I ended up working at a department store and falling back on dance, ironically enough, and doing choreography and teaching and instructing and doing little bits of semi-professional work here and there, but I was never actually a professional dancer in the sense like, becoming part of a company and so on. So, and my parents really thwarted that idea that I should dance, anyway, so they were kind of annoyed that I had actually fallen back on dance instead of falling back on teaching, which is usually the way things go. But 6 months after I was married, I realized I had made a very grave mistake, and I can remember calling my mom and saying, I don't think I can do this. I don't think this was right. I think I've made a mistake. And this is one of the first times I can remember my mother being actively mean and saying, too bad, you made your bed, now you're going to have to lie in it. So, and also implying once again that if I dared to end this, what ended up being abusive marriage, that I would be disowned, that I was threatened with the love being taken away from me and not having a family to support me. And so I continued in the marriage. I got pregnant. We moved across the country, and in many ways that was a relief, but it was also my husband isolating me. Not that I was going to get any family support anyway, but through that journey, after I got sick with cancer in 1999, I turned to my mother again, and I said, I'm very unhappy in this marriage. I think it's quite literally making me sick. And my mother said, if you divorce him, we won't support you. And I had 2 small children at the time, so to me that seemed extraordinary. And so once again I felt obliged through family pressure, mostly from my mother, to continue somewhere that didn't actually suit me. And it took another almost 15 years from that time. So this was 1999. It took till 2012. So 13 years, excuse me. It took till 2012 before my mother finally said something to me that was the deal breaker. that was the end of it all, and the recognition that here I was pretending to help all these other people, because in the interim I decided that teaching wasn't for me. I finally took ownership of that, and started doing hypnosis work and hypnotherapy, because that had worked for me while I was going through cancer treatment. So I had sort of started to take classes as a practitioner, and opened a business and as a hypnotherapist, and studied NLP and EFT and whatever I could get my hands on to help clients. And that moment that happened with my mother, where she said that last thing that was finally the deal breaker for me, coincided with the death of a client of mine who was very dear to me and very young, the same age as my own daughter. The death of my father and my best friend of nearly 30 years suddenly. All of it sort of coagulated and coalesced into this huge, all of this trauma erupted in this moment 4 years ago, which is when I finally realized that here I was busy trying to help other people and not helping myself first. So I was giving from an empty well, and I was not taking the responsibility on my own shoulders for doing the work that I was asking my clients to do, which is at its very core a hypocrisy. And I could not continue to do that. So this catalytic moment, this crazy eruption of everything all at the same time, is what's brought me here. And I'm here 4 years into the healing journey, and still not where I'd like to be, but I'm better than I used to be. So I'm grateful for that. And no matter when it comes, I don't think, for me it was at 45. I hope for other people it's much younger and they can get a grip on this earlier. That we just have to take what it brings to us, the lesson that it brings, and hopefully it doesn't have to be super traumatic like mine has been, but that you can get there, that there's hope, there's a little bit of light at the end of this tunnel. And I'm really beginning to see that as I watch all these wonderful videos from people who've been surviving and thriving this for a lot longer than I am. So thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time.